What do you do when the world's most powerful dictator becomes a wanted man overnight? Putin woke up to find himself facing charges that could land him in prison for decades. But there's a catch that makes this entire situation absolutely fascinating. The ICC warrant contains specific allegations that reveal a calculated legal strategy years in the making. And the evidence they're using, it comes from sources Putin never saw coming. This isn't just about justice. It's about a chess game with global consequences. The children started disappearing in March 2022. Ukrainian families in occupied territories watched Russian soldiers arrive at schools, orphanages, and sometimes their own homes. The soldiers carried lists with names. They loaded buses with children as young as 4 years old. The ICC alleges Putin personally approved these operations from the Kremlin. The charges focus on two specific war crimes under the Rome Statute: unlawful deportation of population and unlawful transfer of population. Both carry maximum sentences of life imprisonment. The prosecutors claim Putin ordered the systematic removal of Ukrainian children to Russia, where they would be stripped of their identities and given new lives. The numbers tell a chilling story. Ukrainian officials estimate over 16,000 children were forcibly taken from their homes. But investigators suspect the real figure could be significantly higher. Many children were removed from areas where record-keeping collapsed under occupation. Some families never reported missing children because they feared Russian retaliation. The operation followed a calculated pattern. Russian authorities created fake adoption programs that fast-tracked Ukrainian children to Russian families. They issued new birth certificates with Russian names and birth dates. They enrolled children in Russian schools where they learned a different version of their own country's history. The children were taught that Ukraine never existed as a legitimate nation. Some forgot their native language entirely. Digital forensics investigators tracked the communications networks that coordinated these transfers. They found encrypted messages between regional administrators and Moscow officials discussing quotas for child relocations. Phone intercepts captured conversations between adoption agencies and government handlers. One intercepted call allegedly contained direct references to presidential approval for expanding the program into new territories. Witness testimonies created the most damaging evidence. Former Russian officials who defected provided detailed accounts of planning meetings. Ukrainian teachers who were forced to compile student lists described the selection process. Foster families in Russia came forward with stories about receiving children who spoke no Russian and cried for parents they would never see again. The legal significance of targeting children makes this case exceptionally powerful. International law treats crimes against children as among the most serious violations. The Rome Statute specifically prohibits transferring children of one group to another group with intent to destroy their cultural identity. Prosecutors argue this constitutes a form of genocide through cultural elimination. Marina survived the deportation process and escaped back to Ukraine after 8 months in a Russian foster home. She was 12 when soldiers took her from her school in Mariupol. The Russian family that received her changed her name and told neighbors she was an orphan rescued from Ukrainian Nazis. She never stopped trying to contact her mother in Kherson. Thousands of Ukrainian families continue searching for missing children years after the initial deportations. They use social media groups to share photographs and last known locations. Some parents have traveled to Russian cities following leads from former captives. Others work with international organizations that attempt to negotiate returns through third-party countries. Investigators faced extraordinary challenges penetrating Russian state operations. They relied on satellite imagery, showing bus convoys crossing borders at unusual times. They analyzed social media posts from Russian families celebrating new adoptions with suspiciously timed dates. They cross-referenced Russian bureaucratic documents that were leaked by anonymous sources within the system. The evidence-gathering process required investigators to work inside active war zones. They interviewed refugees in temporary camps across Eastern Europe. They collected testimony from Ukrainian officials who managed to flee occupied areas. They documented Russian propaganda materials that celebrated the child transfer programs as humanitarian rescue operations. the ICC's final determination stated that sufficient evidence existed to prove Putin bore individual criminal responsibility. The judges found credible proof that he knew about the systematic nature of child deportations. They determined he failed to prevent these crimes despite having effective control over the forces committing them. The prosecutors had built their case around proving direct command responsibility for war crimes. How do you investigate someone who controls nuclear weapons and has never faced accountability? The ICC found a way. They treated Putin like any other suspect in a criminal investigation. The approach required building a methodical case using evidence that could survive challenges in international court. The investigation began while artillery shells were still falling on Ukrainian cities. ICC prosecutors established field offices in Poland and Romania to interview fleeing refugees. They worked with Ukrainian law enforcement to preserve crime scene evidence before Russian forces could destroy it. The timing created unique opportunities, but also extraordinary dangers. Investigators traveled to active combat zones wearing bulletproof vests and helmets. They collected witness statements in basement shelters between air raid sirens. Some testimony sessions were interrupted by incoming missile strikes. The prosecutors interviewed over 300 witnesses across 7 countries during the evidence collection phase. Digital forensics teams discovered the communication networks that connected Moscow to regional operations. They intercepted phone calls between Russian military commanders and civilian administrators discussing child transfer quotas. Satellite imagery showed bus convoys moving from Ukrainian territories into Russia at predetermined times and locations. Banking records revealed payments to adoption agencies that coincided with deportation operations. The Witness Protection Program expanded specifically for this case. Former Russian officials who provided testimony received new identities in Western countries. Ukrainian teachers who compiled student lists for Russian forces faced death threats after cooperating with investigators. 3 key witnesses died under suspicious circumstances before they could testify. Social media posts became powerful evidence of criminal intent. Russian families posted photographs celebrating new adoptions with Ukrainian children whose ages and arrival dates matched deportation records. Russian government officials published statements describing the child transfers as permanent humanitarian rescues. Propaganda videos showed Putin personally meeting with deported Ukrainian children in Kremlin ceremonies. The legal strategy focused on command responsibility doctrine. Prosecutors needed to prove Putin knew about the crimes and failed to prevent or punish them. They documented his direct involvement in policy decisions through captured government memos and intercepted communications. They showed he had effective control over the forces committing these acts. Russian military communications revealed coordination between different branches of government. The FSB provided security for deportation operations. The Ministry of Education developed curriculum to erase Ukrainian cultural identity. Regional governors received directives signed by Putin's chief of staff authorizing expanded child transfer programs. The evidence package landed on ICC judges' desks in January 2023. 3 judges reviewed the materials during closed-door sessions over 6 weeks. They examined witness credibility, document authenticity, and legal precedents for command responsibility. The deliberation process followed strict protocols for evaluating evidence quality. Prosecutors used Russian propaganda against Putin in court filings. They cited his public speeches, praising the child rescue operations as evidence of knowledge and intent. They referenced Russian state television programs that celebrated the cultural re-education of Ukrainian children. They quoted Putin's own words describing the transfers as permanent solutions. The investigation team included prosecutors from 12 different countries. They shared intelligence resources and coordination systems. European nations provided technical expertise for digital evidence analysis. The United States contributed satellite surveillance data and communications intercepts. Forensic accountants tracked the financial infrastructure supporting deportation operations. They found budget allocations for new orphanages in Russian border regions. They discovered contracts for transportation services that matched deportation timelines. They identified payments to local officials who processed fake adoption paperwork. The judges required corroboration for every major piece of evidence. Single witness accounts needed supporting documentation. Intercepted communications required verification through multiple sources. The standard of proof demanded certainty beyond reasonable doubt for international prosecution. Investigators compiled over 1,000 pieces of evidence spanning 2 years of documentation. The evidence file included witness statements, intercepted communications, financial records, satellite imagery, and digital forensics analysis. Each piece was cataloged according to ICC evidence standards and legal requirements. The methodical investigation process created an unprecedented legal challenge to Putin's power. The prosecutors had transformed scattered allegations into a comprehensive criminal case that could survive international legal scrutiny. Putin has allegedly committed war crimes for decades. Why did the ICC finally act now? The timing reveals a calculated strategy that lawyers and diplomats had been planning since 2014. The warrant represents the culmination of legal groundwork that took years to establish. Multiple political and legal factors aligned to make this prosecution possible. European intelligence agencies began sharing information more freely after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Western governments provided funding for expanded ICC investigation capabilities. The court's budget increased by 40% between 2020 and 2023, specifically to handle complex war crimes cases. Previous alleged crimes in Chechnya never resulted in ICC action because Russia was not a member state. The court lacked jurisdiction over Russian territory and Russian nationals. Similar limitations prevented prosecution for alleged violations in Georgia during the 2008 conflict. Syria presented another jurisdictional dead end because neither Syria nor Russia accepted ICC authority. Ukraine made a strategic decision in 2013 that changed everything. The government accepted ICC jurisdiction over crimes committed on Ukrainian territory dating back to 2013. This decision was made months before the revolution that ousted President Yanukovych. Ukrainian officials understood they were creating a legal pathway for future prosecutions. The 2013 declaration gave the ICC authority to investigate crimes committed by anyone on Ukrainian soil. Russian forces operating in occupied territories fell under this jurisdiction. Putin's involvement in directing operations from Moscow created the command responsibility link that prosecutors needed. European allies provided crucial support for the investigation. German intelligence agencies shared intercepted communications from Russian military networks. British forensics experts analyzed digital evidence from occupied territories. French prosecutors contributed expertise in command responsibility cases. The Netherlands provided secure facilities for witness interviews. The 2022 invasion created unprecedented documentation opportunities. Modern smartphones captured real-time evidence of deportation operations. Social media posts provided timestamps and locations for criminal activities. Satellite technology monitored troop movements and facility construction across occupied territories. Digital communication networks left evidence trails that previous conflicts never generated. Russian military units used encrypted messaging systems that were later compromised by Western intelligence agencies. Government officials sent emails and text messages that revealed planning details for child deportation programs. Global sentiment shifted dramatically after the February 2022 invasion. Countries that previously remained neutral began supporting international prosecution efforts. Switzerland froze Russian assets and provided financial intelligence to investigators. India abstained from UN votes, but allowed ICC personnel to interview Russian defectors on Indian territory. The geopolitical calculations involved weighing justice against nuclear escalation risks. ICC prosecutors consulted with NATO security officials about potential Russian responses to arrest warrants. Western intelligence agencies assessed the probability that Putin would use nuclear weapons if cornered by international law. Some governments worried that prosecuting Putin could eliminate diplomatic solutions to the conflict. Others argued that accountability was necessary to prevent future aggression. The debate occurred behind closed doors in European capitals and Washington throughout 2022. The ICC waited for maximum evidence strength before acting. Prosecutors wanted overwhelming proof that could withstand Russian legal challenges and international scrutiny. They needed witness testimony that would survive cross-examination and documentary evidence that could not be disputed. The court also waited for sufficient international support to make the warrant meaningful. Too many countries needed to be willing to enforce arrest obligations. The timing coincided with expanded European unity on Russia's sanctions and military aid to Ukraine. The strategic delay allowed prosecutors to build an airtight case while ensuring global backing for enforcement. The warrant was issued when evidence quality peaked and international cooperation reached unprecedented levels. The legal foundation was now complete. Putin faced charges backed by evidence that took years to collect and international support that had never existed for previous alleged crimes. Countries worldwide would soon face a choice between honoring international law and maintaining diplomatic relations with Moscow. Putin now faces a global web of legal obligations. 123 countries are bound by law to arrest him on sight. But will they? The arrest warrant creates binding obligations under the Rome Statute for every ICC member state. Putin cannot legally enter these territories without facing detention. The practical implications reshape global diplomacy overnight. Every ICC member nation must choose between arresting Putin or violating international law. The list includes major European powers, most of Africa, and key allies across multiple continents. Germany, France, the United Kingdom, and 30 other European nations are legally required to detain Putin if he steps foot on their soil. This creates an unprecedented diplomatic crisis for countries that maintain working relationships with Moscow. South Africa faces particular pressure because it relies on Russian grain imports and nuclear technology cooperation. The government must balance economic interests against legal obligations under international law. Historical precedents show how wanted leaders navigate arrest warrants. Omar al-Bashir faced ICC charges for genocide in Darfur starting in 2009. He played a careful game of international travel that avoided member states for over a decade. Bashir visited friendly nations like China, Russia, and several Middle Eastern countries that were not ICC members. The Sudanese leader made calculated trips to African Union summits in countries that publicly opposed his arrest. South Africa allowed him to attend a 2015 summit, despite legal obligations to detain him. The incident created a constitutional crisis and damaged South Africa's reputation in international legal circles. Some countries have already signaled they would arrest Putin immediately. Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia announced they would fulfill their legal obligations without hesitation. Poland stated that Putin would face detention the moment he entered Polish airspace. The Netherlands confirmed it would arrest Putin despite historical energy partnerships with Russia. Other nations remain strategically silent about their enforcement intentions. Hungary maintains close ties with Moscow and has not clarified its position. Turkey is not an ICC member but hosts frequent diplomatic meetings that Putin previously attended. Serbia faces pressure to choose between European integration and Slavic solidarity. Putin's international travel now requires careful calculation of legal risks. His diplomatic activities are effectively confined to friendly nations outside the ICC jurisdiction. China, India, Iran, and several Central Asian republics remain safe destinations for Russian presidential visits. The geographic restrictions create a prison of friendly nations. Putin can no longer attend G20 summits held in member countries. He cannot participate in European security conferences or UN meetings in New York. His absence from international forums diminishes Russian influence in global decision-making. Enforcement mechanisms include economic and diplomatic consequences for non-compliance. The ICC can refer violations to the UN Security Council and the Assembly of States Parties. Member countries that refuse to arrest wanted leaders face potential sanctions and exclusion from international cooperation programs. The court has limited power to compel arrests but can create significant political costs for non-compliance. Countries that ignore arrest obligations face criticism from allies and potential isolation in international organizations. The reputational damage often outweighs short-term benefits of maintaining relationships with wanted leaders. Putin could test the warrant by attempting travel to a member state that depends on Russian energy or trade. A visit to Hungary or Serbia would force these governments to choose between legal obligations and economic interests. The scenario could split European unity and expose weaknesses in international law enforcement. The arrest warrant has already succeeded in limiting Putin's global influence before any attempted enforcement. Russian diplomatic isolation increases as Putin cannot personally conduct negotiations in most world capitals. His absence from international forums reduces Moscow's ability to shape global policies and build coalitions. The legal trap now surrounds Putin wherever he travels. The question remains whether international justice can ultimately reach the world's most protected leader. This warrant represents the first time international law has successfully cornered a nuclear-armed leader. No previous case has created such extensive legal restrictions on a world leader's movement and diplomatic activities. The precedent changes how international justice approaches crimes committed by heads of state with massive military power. The case continues to develop as investigators gather additional evidence and more countries clarify their enforcement positions. Don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments about whether international justice can truly reach the world's most powerful leaders when they control nuclear weapons and vast security apparatus. Make sure to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you don't miss a video. See you next time on Crime Republic.